I'm now covering the vision for the future MCHW and some key practical implications, including the new structure of MCHW volumes, the new style and format of the specification for highways works and the notes for guidance, volumes 1 and 2, and the presentation of national variations. So hopefully by the end of this session you will have a clear understanding of what we are trying to achieve with the MCHW updates. To drive the future MCHW, we have defined a vision statement, which is on this slide. The future MCHW will provide clear and unambiguous requirements and instructions compatible with modern control forms and future construction practices. So this vision statement covers clarity of requirements for constructors and instructions for the specifier. It also covers the compatibility with modern control forms, control neutrality in particular, and also compatibility with future construction practices, which includes decarbonization, customer focus, digitalization, for example. There are 10 practical implications of the previous vision statement. Firstly, the MCHW will be developed and hosted digitally, which will also enable machine readability. There is a new MCHW volume structure. Volume 1 covering the specification for highways works and Volume 2 covering the notes for guidance will be fully updated and with a new look and style. Volume 3 containing drawings will be removed, and the drawings will be fully updated and moved to the relevant DMRB and SHW documents, but also the archived versions of the old drawings will be made available. Volume 4, covering the bill of quantities, will be fully updated by the Highways England commercial team. Volume 5, covering specialist activities, will be removed and relevant content migrated to Volumes 1, 2 and 4 as relevant. Volume 6 will also be removed and relevant content will migrate to the DMRB and the health and safety documents as relevant. We'll have control neutral clauses. We will introduce nationally determined requirements and sections to cover national variations. And overall, the final goal will be to move towards full compatibility between MCHW and DMRB. For the purpose of this presentation, I will focus my attention on the 3 areas identified on the slide in red. So I will explain the new structure of the MCHW volumes, the new style and format of volumes 1 and 2, and also how national variations will be introduced. Let me start with the new MCHW volume structure. The MCHW content will be allocated within the matrix of technical requirements. This was introduced during the DMRB work program to allocate the documents, the DMRB documents. For those of you who are not familiar with this matrix, overall, all the DMRB documents were allocated based on the relevant life cycle stage and the discipline. And most of the MRB documents ended up into the general information, appraisal and design. Some of them ended up in the maintenance and operation, inspection and disposal. The MCHW documents will be allocated under a new row, contract preparation row, covering the instruction for specifier documents, which I will present in a second, and the specification for highways works documents under the construction row. The structure of the MCHW volumes, the current structure, is presented on this slide. There are 7 volumes overall. We start with volume 0, which contains the implementation requirements and some general information. And then we have volume 1 with the specification for highways works, notes for guidance in volume 2, highways construction details and drawings in volume 3. The bill of quantities contained in volume 4, then we have specialist activities in volume 5 and some requirements covering diversionary works and health and safety content in Volume 6. This structure will change completely in the new MCHW. In the future, we'll only have 3 places where information will be provided. We're going to have the specification for highways works documents, instructions for specifier documents, and bill of quantities content. So the SHW documents will end up in the construction row, as I explained before, looking at the matrix of technical requirements, whereas the instruction for specifier documents will be provided in the new contract preparation row. There is still discussion around the bill of quantities and where it will be provided, either within the MCHW or into separate documentation. But for the purpose of this training and for your role as consultees, it's important to understand where the content will be allocated to essentially have an awareness of what's going on in the MCHW. So broadly speaking, within the specification for highways works documents, you will find most of the Volume 1 content, as well as some content taken from Volume 0, 2, 3 and 5. In the instruction for specifier documents, we'll end up most of the content from Volume 2, the notes for guidance, but also some content from Volume 0 and Volume 5 as relevant. The bill of quantities will contain Volume 4 and some of the Volume 5 content. But there is also another important point to be made here, which is about the content relevant to design, which is currently contained in the MCHW. This content will be identified and migrated to the DMRB, particularly to the design row of the DMRB. So you will see through document development, through the documents you will be reviewing, that there are also some DMRB clauses or new DMRB documents which have been created to contain such information relevant to designers. Finally, some of the health and safety content, which is now in Volume 6, will move to the health and safety documents. The second practical implication for you to be aware of is in relation to the style and format of Volumes 1 and 2. On this slide, you can see on the left-hand side of the screen a table of content relevant for the SHW, and on the right-hand side the notes for guidance. And there is normally a relationship between the two. When you start looking at the specific content in these documents, you will realize that in some cases there is a direct relationship between clauses, but in other cases there isn't. And you can also notice that there are paragraphs full of text which can contain multiple requirements, or in the case of notes for guidance, multiple notes. The third component of this system of contract information is provided on this slide, and this is given by the contract-specific appendices, which are appendices to the notes for guidance, which in turn refers to the SHW. The content and presentation of the SHW will be very different. The figures on this slide provides an example of the content for the specification for highways works in future. Firstly, the SHW requirements will be split out, so we'll no longer have long paragraphs and multiple requirements in the same clause. And secondly, the SHW requirements will only cover products, materials, and activities related to products and materials, like aspects related to installation and workmanship requirements, verification requirements, and documentation requirements. The notes for guidance will also change significantly. Perhaps the change in the notes for guidance will be even more significant than the one in the specification for highways works. They will change in terms of scope and in terms of structure. Specifier instructions will be aligned with the SHW requirements and only included where the SHW requirements refer to the work-specific inputs, as you can see in this example. The style is also very different from the type of clauses that were used in the notes for guidance. You notice that the specifier and instruction SI 1.2 presents a very different style, is much more concise, and it is directly related to the relevant constructor requirement. For ease of use by specifiers, instructions for specifiers documents will be published with both the default set of constructor requirements for the SHW and the specifier instructions on providing the required work-specific inputs. But the specifier is not expected to adhere to the constructor requirements, but these are provided for information only. So, in short, compared to the current situation, the instruction for specifier documents, which will replace the notes for guidance, will be provided, the instructions will be provided in line with the relevant constructor requirements. It will be everything in one document, and they will have a completely different style. The contra-specific appendices, which were the current appendices in the notes for guidance, will be replaced by the work-specific inputs, WSI. This will be aligned with the specifier instructions. Work will also start very soon to explore the features of a tool that can generate the WSI schedules automatically, and this is called the specifier tool. You will probably be hearing about this term quite a lot over the next few months. To summarize what I've presented in terms of a new style and format of the MCHW and also the new volume structure, it's useful to look at this table, which provides the key changes in terminology. So the current term specification for Highways Works series will be replaced by SHW documents. We no longer call them series. Requirements for constructors in the SHW will become constructor requirements, which is very, very similar. Notes for guidance documents will become instructions for specifier documents. But importantly, the guidance for contract compiler, which is currently in the notes for guidance in volume 2, will become design requirements and advice in the DMRB as relevant. And there are a lot of examples of content in the notes for guidance, which is more relevant to designers than to the specifier, because it is about design decisions, not decisions that are taken by the specifier anyway. Some of the content contained in volume 2 will then become specifier instructions and following the structure that I showed you earlier. And in very few cases, there are also constructor requirements, so requirements which are relevant to the constructor, and they will end up in the SHW. And finally, as I just mentioned in the previous slide, the contra-specific appendices in the notes for guidance will become work-specific inputs. So I did talk to you about the new style of clauses, the new volume structure, but it's also useful to show you the new format of clauses, both in the SHW and the instruction for specifier documents. We have introduced standard format requirements for the SHW, which provide a consistent structure to refer to similar requirements, which also helps readability and rigor. So we have identified a list of standard format requirements, which covers, for example, how to present documentation, verification requirements, how to refer to product specifications, and so on. And the technical authors will be selecting such standard format requirements from CARS where available, and will be using them, will populate such requirements with the relevant information. So when you will see the content provided in the MCHW documents in future, you will find a lot of these standard format requirements being used. Similarly, for the specifier instructions, we have also introduced some standard format instructions in this case. Again, they provide a consistent structure to present information for the specifier, And importantly, the new format supports automation in the production of the schedule of WSI and helps establish a clear link between constructor requirements, specifier instructions, and WSI, the work-specific inputs. So far, I have presented two of the key practical implications for the evolution of the MCHW. I presented the volume structure of the MCHW and the new style and format of volumes 1 and 2. The last aspect I'd like to cover is about national variations, so how this content is presented in the new MCHW. In future, national variations will be called nationally determined requirements, NDR, or nationally determined sections, NDSs. And this depends on whether there is a limited small variation, which can be presented at the requirement level with the NDR, or significant variation, which will require an entire section to be presented. So you can see here that both NDR and NDSs are supported by CARS, and in particular for the NDRs, they are created for each overseeing organizations and they are authored in line and kept together with core requirements in CARS. In terms of NDSs, nationally determined requirements, these are created at section level, and again, the overseeing organizations can change the content as needed. But importantly, all content in an NDS shall relate to the same subject across the 4 organizations, and all NDSs related to the specific subject shall have the same title. So key takeaways from this session are that the MCHW will have a completely different structure and content. The SHW constructor requirements will be rationalized to cover products, materials, and activities related to products and materials. I'm talking about installation and workmanship requirements, as well as documentation and verification requirements, for example. The SHW constructor requirements will be presented using standard format requirements where available on CARS. The notes for guidance in Volume 2 will change significantly, both in terms of scope and structure. Some of the content in the notes for guidance will go into the DMRB when covering design information, and other content will be rephrased as specifier instructions. The specifier instructions will be aligned with the SHW requirements and only included where the SHW requirements refers to work-specific inputs. The specifier instructions will be presented using standard format, which I presented earlier, and national variations will be called nationally determined requirements, NDR, or nationally determined sections, NDSs, as relevant.